Sometimes the air tells you something is about to happen. You can't see it. You can't prove it, but you can feel it. It's a static charge in the arena, a weight in the collective breath of 20,000 people, all waiting for one thing. They've been waiting for months. The championship was gone, vacated. The division was rudderless, the throne empty. The rumors had swirled like dust motes in a spotlight, baseless and desperate. But tonight, the static was real. The building was holding its breath. And then, the world went black. A moment of pure, perfect silence. And then, the sound. Not just music, a war cry. The discordant, brutal guitar riff that could only mean one person. The arena didn't cheer. It detonated. Every screen flashed with her name, Rhea Ripley. She emerged from the smoke, not as a wrestler, but as a returning monarch. The leather, the spikes, the undeniable aura of dominance. She hadn't just recovered from an injury, she had festered. She looked stronger, she looked angrier. The mammy chants were deafening, a chorus of validation. She stalked to the ring, the center of her universe, and grabbed the microphone. The world was finally back on its axis. The champion had come home. She soaked it in, a small, knowing smirk playing on her lips. She was about to speak. She was about to reclaim her kingdom. And that was when the real story began. Before a single word could be spoken, a new theme song cut through the air. The crowd's roar of adulation fractured, turning into a murmur of pure confusion. This music wasn't heavy. It wasn't menacing. It was upbeat, hopeful. It was the theme of Liv Morgan. She appeared on the ramp, not with the manic energy she'd been known for, but with a wide, almost beatific smile. She was dressed simply. She carried no weapon. She just smiled. The camera zoomed in on Rhea, whose own expression mirrored the building. Confusion, annoyance, but also perhaps a flicker of guarded relief. Liv, after all, had been on her own revenge tour. But she was also an old ally, a familiar face from a different lifetime. The mommy chants quieted, replaced by hesitant, scattered Livy cheers. Liv walked down the ramp, her eyes locked on Rhea. She wasn't challenging her. She wasn't posturing. She looked happy. She climbed the steps, entered the ring, and stood face to face with the returning queen. The tension was bizarre. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't friendly. It was a question mark, hanging in the air. Liv's smile never wavered. She nodded slowly, as if confirming something to herself. Then she opened her arms, a clear invitation. The arena noise died completely. What was this? A reunion? A truce? Rhea, still cautious, hesitated. But the sight of the smile, the open gesture, disarmed her. She let a small smile of her own appear and stepped forward. The hug was, for a fleeting second, the image the cameras wanted. Two of the biggest stars in the division, putting history aside. The crowd let out a collective sigh of relief. Maybe this was a new chapter. Maybe this was about mutual respect. Liv hugged Rhea tightly. The ring microphone, still live in Rhea's hand, was pressed between them. It picked up the sound of Liv's breath. And then, it picked up a whisper. Just 2 words. Welcome back. And then, boom. The sound was sickening. It wasn't a punch. It wasn't a kick. Liv, still holding Rhea in the embrace, violently headbutted her, directly on the bridge of the nose. Rhea stumbled back, a look of profound, agonizing shock on her face. Before she could even raise her hands, Liv was on her, not with wrestling moves, with fury. She tackled Rhea to the mat, and the smile was gone, replaced by a terrifying, vacant intensity. She rained down punches, left and right, screaming. It was unfiltered, chaotic, and utterly brutal. The crowd wasn't booing. They were silent. The announcers were speechless. This wasn't a heel turn. This wasn't part of the show. This felt real. Security and officials flooded the ring, pulling a snarling, scratching Liv Morgan off of the crumpled form of Rhea Ripley. and as they dragged her away, Liv looked directly into the camera. She wasn't angry anymore. She was smiling again. It was a message, and everyone, in the arena and at home, understood it. This wasn't just revenge. This was an execution. The show didn't just go to commercial. It crashed into it. The screen went black for a few seconds longer than usual. When the broadcast returned, the announcers were visibly shaken. They tried to call the action of the next match, but their voices were hollow. The action everyone cared about was the stain on the mat and the memory of the silence. In the arena, it was worse. The silence lingered. You could hear individual voices. Is she okay? Was that supposed to happen? A child in the front row, wearing Rhea's mommy t-shirt, was crying. His father, trying to console him, just kept shaking his head. This is the part of the story we don't see on television. The vibration of the betrayal. It wasn't entertainment. It felt like a violation. The thousands of people who had felt the explosion of joy just minutes earlier now felt cold. They felt cheated. They had waited months for this triumphant return, this catharsis, and Liv Morgan hadn't just stolen the moment. She had poisoned it. She had taken their hope and, with one sickening smile, thrown it back in their faces. The rest of the show unfolded, but no one was watching. They were all processing. They were looking at the empty ramp, half expecting Rhea to return, to fix it. But she didn't. The only thing that remained was the echo of that silence, the collective gasp of a world turned upside down. The hero hadn't been defeated. She had been erased. Backstage, through the gorilla position, is where the real panic set in. This wasn't just a shock to the fans. It was a grenade thrown into the script. Producers were yelling into headsets, their faces pale. Agents who had planned the next 6 months of storytelling were throwing their papers down in disgust. The plan was meaningless now. Rhea's family, the Judgment Day, were the first to meet her as she was half carried, half dragged through the curtain by medical staff. Dominic Mysterio's face, usually a mask of arrogant disdain, was ashen. He looked like a son who had just seen his parent hurt. Finn Balor, the veteran, was silent, his eyes cold and analytical, already calculating the consequences. Damian Priest, the powerhouse, punched a steel equipment case, the sound echoing through the hallway. This wasn't their plan. This was an invasion. But the most telling reaction was from the other wrestlers. They peeked out of locker rooms. They stopped their warm-ups. The usual backstage chatter was gone. There was a new hierarchy, and it had just been established. Liv Morgan, who had been dragged to a separate part of the building, wasn't yelling. She wasn't celebrating. She was simply sitting on a production crate, humming to herself, as the company's executives screamed at her. She just smiled. She had broken the unspoken rule. She had gone into business for herself, and in doing so, she had just made herself the most dangerous and the most valuable person in the entire industry. By the time the show was off the air, the internet was a wildfire. The clip, the embrace, the whisper, the attack was everywhere. It had transcended wrestling, sports networks, gossip sites, pop culture blogs. They all had the footage. The narrative was immediate and brutal. Rhea Ripley's triumphant return lasts 90 seconds. Liv Morgan's shocking attack, real or staged. The most vicious betrayal in WWE history? The talking heads on the post-show panels were completely derailed. They had their segments planned. What's next for Rhea? Who will challenge the champion? All of it irrelevant. Now the only question was, why? And a darker, more insidious question began to bubble up, spoken by the critics and the cynics. Was Rhea ready? Did she come back too soon? Did Liv Morgan just expose the champion as fragile? In less than 5 minutes, Liv had hijacked the entire media machine. She hadn't just attacked Rhea's body, she had attacked her legacy. Rhea's entire persona was built on being an Eras Tour level of dominant. She was the immovable object, and Liv Morgan had just moved her. The conversation was no longer about Rhea's power. It was about her vulnerability. The media, intentionally or not, was doing Liv's work for her. They were tearing down the icon, all while asking, what could have possibly motivated Liv Morgan to do this? The message was spreading. The throne was empty. And the woman who emptied it was now the only one the world wanted to hear from. We often forget in the spectacle that these stables are, in their own way, families. The Judgment Day wasn't just a group. It was an ecosystem. And Liv had just thrown a rock through their window. The cameras hidden in the backstage area for the after show caught a scene not meant for the public. A furious, heated argument. Damian Priest pointing a finger in Finn Balor's face. You knew. You had to know. Finn, ice cold, denying everything. This isn't our business. This is her business. Dominic pacing back and forth, helpless, looking for someone to tell him what to do. The group's strength came from their unity, their us against the world mentality. But now, the world had gotten in. This was the unseen consequence. Rhea wasn't just their leader. She was their shield. She absorbed the attacks. She was the one everyone feared. With her gone, or even just appearing weak, the family was exposed. Were they still the Judgment Day? Or were they just 4 individuals, suddenly alone? This doubt was Liv's second victory. She knew that to topple a queen, you must first isolate her from her court. She didn't just attack Rhea. She attacked the idea of Rhea. And in the process, she had planted the seeds of distrust that would, in the coming weeks, tear the most dominant group in the company apart from the inside out. The fortress was breached, and the attackers were already inside the walls. Forget the roaring arena, forget the cameras. The truest part of the story was happening under fluorescent lights, in a cold, sterile medical room. Rhea Ripley sat on an examination table. The mommy persona was gone. This was just a woman, exhausted, in pain, and utterly humiliated. A doctor was shining a light in her eyes, testing for a concussion. Her nose was almost certainly broken. Her shoulder, the one she had just spent months rehabilitating, was wrapped in ice. But the physical pain was nothing. It was the silence. She had envisioned this night for so long. The roar of the crowd, the championship held high, the validation of her return. She had pictured herself as the conqueror. Now, she was just a patient. She felt the eyes of the medical staff. They weren't looking at her like a champion. They were looking at her with pity. That was the cut that went deepest, the vulnerability, the doubt. She had come back, and she had failed. She had failed her family. She had failed the fans. She had failed herself. In this quiet, antiseptic room, the armor had cracked. The champion was, for the first time in her career, truly and completely alone. She wasn't thinking about revenge. She wasn't thinking about the title. She was just thinking, how did I not see this coming? The throne she had fought so hard to reclaim felt, in that moment, 1,000,000 miles away, and in another part of the building, in a locker room they had given her to cool off, Liv Morgan was also alone. But her solitude was different. It wasn't cold. It was electric. She was sitting on the floor, her back against the lockers. Her knuckles were bruised. There was a smear of Rhea's face paint on her forearm. She was staring at her own hands, as if she was seeing them for the first time. The manic smile was gone. The terrifying calm was gone. In its place was a look of profound, unsettling peace. For years, she was the one who got attacked. She was the plucky underdog. The one who smiled through the pain. The one the crowd loved because she tried so hard, even when she lost. She was the lovable, relatable, perpetually second-place hero. And she had grown to hate that person. To become the monster, you have to kill the hero. Tonight, she hadn't just attacked Rhea Ripley. She had murdered Liv Morgan. She had finally stopped asking for her moment and had simply taken it. She had taken the biggest star on the biggest night, and broken her in half. There was no going back. She had crossed a line, and she knew it. She had traded the love of millions for the fear of everyone. And as she sat there in the dark, listening to the muffled chaos outside her door, she finally felt in control. The crown was in sight. The next week, the arena was a tinderbox. No music, no celebration, just tension. Rhea Ripley, against all medical advice, walked to the ring. Her face was a map of bruises. Her eyes were not the eyes of mommy. They were the eyes of a hunter. She didn't have a microphone. She just waited. She knew she wouldn't have to wait long. Liv's music hit, but she didn't come down the ramp. The cameras panned up. She was in the crowd, sitting among the people, a microphone in her hand. She looked calm. She looked rested. Rhea yelled, her voice raw. "Why, Liv? Why?" Liv smiled, and the arena booed so loudly it shook the cameras. She let them boo. She waited, and then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper, yet it carried over the entire building. "Why? You really don't know?" she asked. "You were my friend, Rhea. You were my partner. And then, you left. You found a new family. You climbed the mountain, and you never, not once, looked back to see who was still at the bottom." She stood up. "I watched you get everything I ever wanted. The title, the fame, the love." She spat the word. "The crowd calling you mommy, while they just called me Livy, the eternal sidekick, the plucky little sister." She started walking down the stairs. "I didn't do it for a title, Rhea. I did it to correct a mistake. I did it to take back what was mine." Rhea shook her head. "You've lost your mind. I earned this. You just took a cheap shot." Liv laughed. A cold, empty sound. She reached the ringside barrier and looked up at her former friend. "A cheap shot," she said, her voice dripping with mock pity. "Rhea, you think this was an impulse? You think I just snapped?" And this was the moment the entire story clicked. This was the twist that chilled everyone to the bone. "Who do you think leaked the information about your shoulder rehab being ahead of schedule?" Liv asked. "Who do you think fed the inside sources the rumor that you were cleared for this specific night?" Rhea's face went from anger to a slow, dawning, sickening horror. "I needed you at your best, Mommy," Liv whispered. "I needed you to be the conquering hero. I needed the whole world to be watching. I needed them to see the Queen, so I could be the one to watch her bleed." The realization hit the crowd. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. This was a plan. Months of it. The title, "After All These Years," She is Back. It was never about Rhea's return. It was about Liv's arrival. She had waited all these years not for a moment, but to build one. She had built her throne out of Rhea's legacy, and she had just cemented it with her blood. The show ended, not with Rhea's music, but with Liv Morgan, holding her arms out, absorbing the hatred of the world. She wasn't just back to take over. She already had.